Top stories: Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first response to US allegations of an alleged Indian plot to kill US-based Khalistan terror backer Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said India will definitely look into any evidence provided on this alleged link to the terror plot. However, in a strong pushback, he also exposed Western hypocrisy on extremism and intimidation being permitted in the garb of free speech. India is deeply concerned with the activities of extremist groups overseas. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said extremist groups overseas were engaged in intimidation and incitement to violence under the guise of freedom of expression. This was Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first response to the US claims of an Indian national's alleged role in a plot to kill a Khalistani terrorist, Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, in the United States. The Prime Minister said the government will look into any evidence submitted. In an interview to UK-based The Financial Times, Prime Minister Modi also said that the relations between India and the United States could not be derailed by a few incidents. He said India is concerned about extremist groups based overseas. Extremists were exploiting freedom of expression. India would look into the assassination attempt claims. Not appropriate to link a few incidents with diplomatic ties. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has repeatedly exposed West's double standards on extremism. The Prime Minister underscored the importance of security and counter-terrorism cooperation. He said it had been a key component of the ties between India and the US. The Prime Minister insisted there is strong bipartisan support for the strengthening of this relationship, which is a clear indicator of a mature and stable partnership. The United States had earlier claimed to have foiled a plot to assassinate Khalistan terror supporter Gurpatwant Singh Pannu with the arrest of Nikhil Gupta, a 52-year-old Indian national suspected of being a gun for hire. Gupta, according to the US, had agreed to pay an assassin $100,000 to kill Pannu in the US. The United States also claimed that Gupta was regularly in touch with an Indian official in New Delhi. Gupta was arrested in the Czech Republic at the request of the United States in connection with his alleged participation in the plot to kill Pannu. Bureau Report, India Today. India was deeply concerned about the activities of certain extremist groups based overseas. These elements, under the guise of freedom of expression, have engaged in intimidation and incited violence. Strong words from Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Is India pushing back against West's double standards? Does the Pannu episode have the potential to adversely impact India-US relations? Let's try and make sense of these developments. Joining me on India Today, Seema Sirohi, author, Friends with Benefits, The India-US Story. Also with me, Ambassador Veena Sikri, former top diplomat, and Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, somebody who keeps a keen eye on this strategic relationship. But Seema Sirohi, I want to begin by asking you, is India pushing back and exposing West's double standards on support to elements like Pannu and Khalistan terror?
Look, what India is doing and what the Prime Minister said, something more important actually, that the US relationship is now mature enough that it can withstand a challenge like this. The US indictment in the New York District Court is a serious problem. I mean, neither side has denied that. But I think what's important is how both sides have sort of dealt with it with a lot of care and calmly. There's no public posturing. There's no, sort of hyped up statements, no chest thumping. This is a problem because, it's one thing that this kind of accusation is leveled against India in a country that is known to harbor terrorists, i.e., Pakistan or some other place. But to have an accusation like this in a friendly country with which India is trying very hard to develop relations, which is a hugely important strategic partner, is another ball game altogether. You see the difference how India handled the problem with the US and with Canada.
Okay.
The two things are very different. Indian attitude, that is.
But you know what, I'm also very surprised, and let me take that to Sushant Sareen. Yes, India does, expose Pakistan every other day for harboring terrorists, and Pakistan does so. But India is also very surprised that the United States or Canada would harbor terrorists and extremists. But the Prime Minister, when he says, if our citizen has done anything good or bad, we are ready to look into it. What do you make of the Prime Minister's response?
Gaurav, first, I'm a little surprised that you are surprised that countries like Britain, US, and Canada have, given refuge to terrorists. In fact, when it came to Northern Ireland, the Americans continued to support the IRA in many ways, including American congressmen and others, despite having very close relations with the Brits. They seem to think that they have a certain amount of exceptionalism. From our perspective, yes, we consider them to be a friendly country, and we believe that unlike terrorist states like Pakistan, countries like the United States should not harbor people who openly issue terror threats and try and incite violence in India. So that is one part of it. The second part of it is what the Prime Minister said. Now out here, I think in his own way, the Prime Minister has been very polite, very firm. He has indicated that this issue is not one which will, which has the capacity to kind of derail the India-US relationship, because the India-US relationship is far wider and broader than just simply this particular issue.
Okay.
But he's also flagged certain other things as far as India is concerned. The fact that we don't have to agree on anything, on everything, just because we are partners. We will follow our own course where it suits us, just as the Americans would do the same, right? He has indicated that, yes, in case there is a problem, we'll look at it, we'll try and solve it. But that does not mean that it will be solved according to American satisfaction.
Okay.
It will be solved, it will be handled, we will look into it. But just because the Americans have leveled any allegations does not mean that we are going to accept it. And finally, Gaurav, I think it's very important for us to understand, and this is just one area on which I disagree with Seema. A lot is being made that this is an independent judicial process and why this has happened. Now, it's not an independent judicial process when 5 congressmen of Indian origin come out and issue a statement. Somebody
in fact, I'm coming to that point in just a moment, Sushant. I'm coming to that point.
Yeah, somebody's put them to it. So the American administration at one level is playing it down, at another level is constantly pushing the envelope and trying to finger us.
And coming to that point, is America trying to finger us, as you put it? But let me bring in Ambassador Sikri into this conversation. Ambassador Veena Sikri, read between the lines what the Prime Minister of India is trying to tell the United States of America. What's your appreciation, ma'am?
I think I would really appreciate Prime Minister Modi's statement as being very well-rounded and balanced. He has taken on board this incident and put it in the right perspective, that it's one item of disagreement that has come up between India and the USA. We are prepared to handle it. We will not let it override the relationship. But at the same time, he has flagged the issues of importance. He flagged the issues of importance that, number one, this is a mature and stable partnership between India and the USA, and this should not be allowed to derail that partnership. We will not let it do that. Secondly, security and counterterrorism are issues of top priority for India and the US. We are cooperating on these issues in many cases, and in this case too, we will cooperate and come to an end and a fair conclusion of the matter. And I think that he has very clearly stated that within India, there is a bipartisan support for developing the India-US partnership.
Within the
And
United
we will
States.
go ahead and do that.
Okay.
But we have, to take on board the American concerns, we have instituted a high-level inquiry committee. Now, that in itself, I think there is a tacit agreement from the government of the USA that this high-level inquiry committee can can be established and function in India, and everybody will wait for the outcome of this inquiry committee's findings.
Okay.
So I think that is already a step forward.
However, that point that extremism, violent extremism and intimidation is not free speech, that's a very clear point being made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Seema Sirohi. India and the US, friends with benefits. But in the Pannu case, is the US, as Sushant Sareen also puts it, is the US trying to put India on the defensive, on the back foot, a signal perhaps to remain perhaps a submissive junior partner? And does the Prime Minister's response indicate that's not to be?
Well, I am not a believer of that school of thought that India can any longer be a junior partner to anybody, you know. So I think India is strong enough, big enough, economically resilient enough that that kind of thinking sort of represents an old attitude. What I would say is this: if this was such an important issue, the few Khalistanis that make so much trouble in US, Canada, and the UK, has India demanded like proper action? Has India made it a talking point in every meeting? I'm not so sure. So if it was such a big problem, we should have leveraged then, you know, anything that was necessary to get action from the Americans. Number two, I'd like to address my friend Sushant's point about the Indian congressmen. Okay, look at it this way. These are 5 Indian American congressmen. They're politicians. Do you think they're trying to sort of, build a wall so that the spotlight doesn't shine on them? They have to prove, more loyal than the king. It's a very delicate situation for them. They asked for a briefing from the intelligence community and gave what I think is a very balanced statement. They said the relationship is hugely important, but this is an issue that must be addressed, which is what I think all non-partisan observers of the relationship would say.
Okay. At the same time, US being a strategic partner of India, Ambassador Sikri, Seema Sirohi asked that point, that did India ever raise it with the Americans in the past activities of Gurpatwant Singh Pannu with the Americans? With the Canadians, I know India did, and repeatedly, from foreign ministers to prime minister to even Captain Amrinder Singh when he was chief minister of Punjab, he'd raised the Khalistan issue with Justin Trudeau. But Ambassador Sikri, there are some who argue that the honeymoon phase in this India-US relations is now over. Some even indicate Joe Biden's response to India's Republic Day invitation is also an indicator. Is that how you see it too?
No. Well, let me say that it certainly does seem that there is a lobby within the United States, within some group, maybe some part of the Democratic Party, which would be quite happy to see the India-US relation derailed. And that lobby seems to be very hard at work. I think the question now is how India is able to respond and how the overall relationship and what President Biden has been saying about the primacy of the India-American relationship, how that is fulfilled. And I think that there again, Prime Minister's response to the Financial Times has been very balanced, because he's highlighted the importance, but also highlighted how the concerns concerns are there and how we are preparing to deal with those concerns, but not let it override the relationship or affect the relationship in any way. So I think that we have to remember that there are these forces within the United States who would see it, but we have to also work within our own national interests, our own domestic interests, and make sure, because after all, we have to also remember that there is no Khalistani interest in India. I mean, the political parties don't want it, the Sikh community doesn't want it, Punjab government people don't want it. So what is it? Why should some people sitting in America be able to do this? So this point has to be raised repeatedly with the United States.
Or are there elements within the United States establishment or in the Canadian establishment who are enablers of people like Nijjar and Pannu? Sushant Sareen, the Prime Minister, made an important point where he said there is strong bipartisan support for the strengthening of this relationship. A clear indicator, as he put it, of the mature and stable partnership. Security and counter-terrorism cooperation have been key components of our partnership. That remains very strong. At the same time, are both America and Canada ignoring India's vital national security concerns on Khalistan terror? Because our consulates have been attacked, our diplomats have been threatened, and there is an attempt by these Khalistanis to use their clout for crime, drug peddling, human trafficking, all of that in our country.
So, Gaurav, between Canada and the US, I'll make a slight distinction. The US wasn't a problem until recently. This Pannu character used to be out there, but he was a lot of hot air. But in recent, Canada was, of course, a country of some serious concern to us, which is why we were reacting as strongly as we were. But now I think this issue is going to come up increasingly with the United States, especially given the fact that, our missions have been attacked and this guy has actually threatened a terrorist attack. Second point, I would like to ask Seema that if Seema sitting in New York was to issue a statement like Pannu has issued against an American airliner in which she said Mexicans should not travel after such and such date because then their life will be in danger, what would have happened to Seema? Number two. Which is what leads me to believe that somebody in the American system is cultivating this Pannu character, using him as some kind of a cat's paw. These intelligence guys always have these games which they play and they will keep playing. And finally, on the Indian Americans, look, number one, I have very little use for Indian Americans in the academic community. Most of them, try and behave too loyal than the white man himself and spout all kinds of nonsense about India. They have no stake in India. They have nothing to do with India, but they only find relevance in India. All these professors and think tankers, they have nothing to do with India, but they will talk about China, talk about Mexico, talk about Canada. Why do you talk about India? You've already gone away from India, number one. Number two, about these politicians, how is it that there were no Mexican-American politicians who took a special briefing? There were no some other politicians who took a special briefing. Why did only these 5 Indian Americans need to weigh in on this matter? We don't need them to tell us what to do.
Okay.
So why are they behaving
multiple volleys fired. Respond to these, and if I may, in your appreciation,
Seema is a very good friend. I have a lot of respect for her writings and everything, but
absolutely,
it's just my way of pushing back.
Absolutely, no, go ahead, and it's no holds barred. I'm not controlling any part of any of this, but does the Pannu episode have the potential to adversely impact India-US relations? Seema, please respond. The floor is yours.
Okay, so in my latest column, I've already said that a certain amount of trust has been eroded, but for different reasons. On the American side, the executive branch feels that, if India can take or allegedly take such actions in a friendly country, what are we talking about? For India, it's all about Western hypocrisy that, how can they harbor a man like this? Definitely a really vile man whom I've blocked, on all the media. Thing is, by giving him so much publicity, are we, indirectly helping him become a bigger, phenomenon than he is or was? Number two, about the Indian American congressman, I agree with Sushant about the academics. I don't want to go there because that would take up too much time. But about the politicians, they were, I think, insulating themselves for future, problems that may arise if this issue is not adequately addressed. Because we cannot deny that this is a problem in the relationship. I still would emphasize the way both sides have handled it 5 years ago. I wouldn't have expected that.
Okay.
And the Canada situation is completely different. Nobody disagrees that their politics are completely beholden to this, sort of extreme bunch of people who call the shots. Even their bureaucracy is completely penetrated. Here, I don't think it's like that. But I would agree with Sushant that intelligence communities everywhere, they have their own games. I'm sorry, I don't have a real insight into that. If the American intelligence was, if he's an agent for them or anything like that, I have no clue.
Okay, but
I wouldn't like
India
to do
well
that.
within its rights, Ambassador Sikri, to feel very disappointed, not just with Canada, but even with the United States of America for not taking action. Canada against Niger and the US against Pannu. After all, he's threatened bodily harm to passengers on board Indian Air India post the 19th of November. But Ambassador Sikri, I want to draw your attention to a statement that both Sushant Sareen and Seema Sarohi have referred to of 5 Indian American lawmakers who said, and I quote, "We believe the US-India partnership made a meaningful impact on the lives of both our people, but we are concerned that the actions outlined in the indictment could, if not appropriately addressed, cause significant damage to this consequential partnership." Is this a threat to India?
Well, first and foremost, it's a generic statement. I agree with some of the aspects that both Seema and Sushant have touched upon. It's a generic statement by them. They're insulating themselves. They don't want to be caught on the wrong foot later. And possibly the so-called briefing that they had, they were told some of the things that they should be putting out. But let's be very clear, these 5 Indian-American origin congressmen, they've made many statements in the past before. They've never been very gracious and kind to the country of their origin on many occasions in the past. So I would not attach too much importance to this statement. I would like to think more that there is some element in the US that is trying very hard to derail the relationship. Let's not get away from that, and let's not also see that is there any truth in what they're trying to say. I mean, that is the point, this high-level inquiry that is there in India. Seema herself wrote about that so-called note from MEA not passing the smell test. So I think this kind of made-up stuff, let's see where it lands up, where it comes out. I mean, Nikhil Gupta himself, his family has filed an appeal in the Supreme Court of India. So let us see where it goes. But I think the overall effort not to derail the relationship that has come out in Prime Minister Modi's statement, that is the important point to keep in sight. We will not let these individual elements do that. And we continue with our own efforts to A, carry forward the relationship, and B, to make it very clear that we are not going to tolerate these kind of statements, calling for bombing of airlines and calling for, saying bombing the parliament and so on. I mean, this is
or
the kind
threatening
of
our diplomats, painting a target on the backs of our diplomats, and actually setting our consulate on fire in San Francisco. Sushant Sareen, frankly, in any civilized conversation, US and Canada should be on the back foot. Their silence on terrorism, their silence on extremists operating from their soil, despite claiming to be a strategic partner, no action has been taken. And frankly, what should have been dealt with privately is aggressively made public. You see this as American intimidation tactics or the West's intimidation tactics?
No, there are a couple of things at play. I think one, as Seema very correctly identified it, it's Western hypocrisy. It's also Western exceptionalism that we can do certain things, you dare not do it. You do what we ask you to do, don't do what we do. That's the ruling motto of the West. So I think one is that factor. The second is, of course, they are trying to turn the screws on us. They are trying to bring certain amount of pressure on us and seeing whether, we'll wilt, whether we'll blink, whether we'll give in, whether, our knees will buckle under. Let's see how that works out. I don't think it's going to play the way they're expecting it to play out. But I think, Gaurav, it is very important for the Indian side to impress upon the Americans that, look, these are not the raving and rantings of a lunatic like Pannu or these other Khalistani scum who live out there, perhaps under CIA, FBI patronage. I don't know whose patronage they live under. The important thing is that these are having real life consequences in India.
Absolutely.
These are having consequences because they are funding, weapons smuggling out here. They are funding drugs out here. They are funding criminal activity. They are funding assassination campaigns in India. It is becoming a big problem. And these are real life consequences. These are people with a track record of having blown up an airline 30 years back.
Yes.
These are real problems.
And I will let that be the last word on this part of the show.
They can play games with this, then I think they have another thought coming, because there are certain red lines even India has. The Americans need to understand it. If it's just hot air somebody is blowing, no problem. He can go and say whatever the hell he wants to say.
Okay.
Nobody will give a damn about it. But if it's having real life consequences, then it has to be addressed.
And perhaps India too should get its dossiers together on these terrorists and terror supporters and send them across to the United States of America. Seema Sirohi, Ambassador Veena Sikri and Sushant Sareen for joining me here on India Today. Many thanks.